This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. In recent years, a wave of populism washed over many parts of the world. We witnessed it here with the election of Donald Trump and his supporters' eagerness to build that wall. In the United Kingdom, a populist movement resulted in a referendum in which the people decided to leave the European Union. Brexit, as it is called, is still in process. In fact, there is a vote at 2 p.m. Eastern Time today, scheduled at least, in Parliament on that issue, despite some indication that there may actually be a change of heart among the people, even as British Prime Minister Theresa May is working to push her unpopular divorce deal through that parliament. Interestingly, she voted against Brexit, but feels it is the will of the people. Aside from the challenge and difficulty faced in breaking ties to the EU, there is the question of what happens once those ties are broken. It is one that is particularly concerning in the Republic of Ireland, where it is feared that Brexit may lead to the reinstitution of a hard border between them and Northern Ireland. The Republic will remain an EU member, while Northern Ireland will exit with the rest of the UK. These worries are exacerbated by the troubles both parts of Ireland faced for nearly 40 years, and which some fear may return with a resurrected border. With that as background, we spend this hour talking to Daniel Mulhall. He is the ambassador of Ireland to the United States, the 18th person to hold that post, one he assumed in 2017, and he is in our Spirit Square studios thanks to the Allegro Foundation. Welcome.
Good morning to you.
Nice to have you here. He speaks today at 1 o'clock at UNC Charlotte Student Activities Center. It's open to the public. I think it's in Salon A. You can get information about that somewhere, probably at UNC Charlotte. And if you'd like to join our conversation, you can email us at charlottetalks@wfae.org or search for WFAE on Facebook. Get to us through Twitter at Charlotte Talks. Prior to your being posted to the United States, you were the ambassador to the United Kingdom. And while you were there, in that position, you campaigned against Brexit because you said it threatened to reverse decades of improving relations since peace was established. Theresa May, as I mentioned, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, voted against it, but people don't like the exit deal that she has cobbled together, and she's now warning the lawmakers in Parliament that their vote against that deal could derail Brexit if they don't approve her plan, and that would cause catastrophic harm, her words, to people's faith in politics. What's your take on that? If there's a change of heart, evidently a lot of people voted for Brexit and didn't realize what they were voting for.
I was in London as ambassador during the lead up to and the aftermath to the 2016 referendum, and I traveled around the country mainly speaking to Irish community groups, but also I did a number of media interviews and gave a number of general speeches in which I made the point, look, it's a matter for you, British people, to decide what your future ought to be. But you ought to remember that British-Irish relations have never been better, and they could be affected negatively by leaving the EU. You ought to remember that Northern Ireland is now at peace after 40 years of violence. We've had 20 years of peace. That is something that's precious and should be preserved. And certainly the EU membership has been important in providing a context for that peace process. So I made it clear that I felt that there were risks in Brexit to British-Irish relations, to Ireland generally, but also to Northern Ireland, and the risk of some border controls having to be brought in because of Brexit.
The Brexit vote by the British people, I believe it was a slim margin of victory, wasn't it?
It was 52 to 48.
Okay, 52 to 48. And evidently, as I said, a lot of people did not realize what it would mean. Some people didn't even know what it was. I went through a whole series of reading yesterday from the BBC, which was explaining to their viewers what it was.
What it was, yeah.
And what it would mean. A lot of people evidently weren't exposed to that. So now there's been this change of heart. And even Theresa May, who didn't want it, is pushing it through because, as she says, to renege on it now would be betraying the people. Well, is that true to you?
Well, let me give you the Irish experience. We're quite different from Britain in the sense that we need to have a referendum whenever we need to change our constitution. So we've had them over the years repeatedly. And so Irish people are used to voting in referendums, and we have procedures for informing the public, and so on. Britain almost never has a referendum. It's a very rare thing indeed to have a referendum in Britain. I think there have been three in the last 100 years. One on the EU in 1975, one on changing their voting system about 10 years ago, and then the referendum on EU membership. So the other thing is that in Ireland, we have had a referendum on European treaties maybe 8 times in the last 40 years, because every time there's a new treaty, we have to ratify that treaty by referendum.
Why?
Because it means changing our constitution, because the constitution needs to be changed every time to allow Ireland to be part of the new treaty arrangements that are proposed in every new treaty. Now, on 2 occasions, the Irish people have voted no. In the case of a treaty about 20 years ago called the Nice Treaty, and a treaty about 10 years ago called the Lisbon Treaty, they voted no. And on those occasions, what the Irish government did was they talked to people. They had a procedure for discussing why did people vote no? What was the problem? And the problem usually was identifiable. There was something in the new treaty people didn't like. So we went about trying to adjust those elements, and then we had a second vote. And in each case, the second vote produced a decisive margin in favour of the new treaty. So for us at least, having a second referendum on a particular issue is not a major issue, because most Irish politicians are actually very favourable to EU membership. One of the problems in Britain is that there's always been an ambivalent attitude towards EU membership, and that's why holding a referendum on an EU topic in Britain was always going to be a risky venture.
Why did they do it? They have an elected government of representatives to vote their conscience in representing the people that they serve in the various districts where these members of parliament come from. Why have a referendum? It's your job to make those decisions. And with regard to Ireland, having all these referenda, that's when you're voting on treaties, the arcane details of treaties. Yeah. How can the average person who's going to work in a factory?
And that's always the problem with treaty referendums in Ireland, is that people say, I can't understand this, therefore I'm voting no. I'm voting no. And there's a huge effort required in informing the public. And I was involved as a civil servant, as a public servant. I was in charge of the European Union division in our foreign ministry, and I had my part of my job was to produce information for the public. And it's not easy, because you're trying to summarize hundreds of pages of detail into a short document that people might actually read over their cornflakes in the morning. So, and of course, when it comes to EU membership, most people across Europe don't understand how the European Union works. So you're trying to take people from very little knowledge to a point where they can make a very complex judgment about what's better for their country, to stay in or to leave. And of course, the problem at the moment in Britain is that the people definitely voted to leave, but the British Parliament has to interpret what version of leave the people want, and that's what they can't agree on. So today, the version that's been negotiated, the arrangement negotiated by the British government, which we hope will pass, because we think it would be a good outcome for everyone. It's a compromise, if you like, and we think it would be a good outcome for Ireland and for Britain and for the European Union, because it would keep Britain quite closely connected with the European Union, which is what we want. But we don't know whether that will pass. In fact, the pundits, the experts, the journalists are predicting that it will not pass. And at that stage, then you will have a situation where there is a vote in favour of Brexit, but the Parliament can't agree on what that means and on how to interpret that vote.
So I think I just heard you say there's a lot of people throughout the European Union who don't understand how it works. Is that what you're saying?
There are probably a lot of people in America who don't understand the American system, right?
I think that's pretty clear.
You know, I mean, and look, let's be honest about it. On a need-to-know basis, most people choose not to take that much interest in how their political system works. But of course, the American system has 250 years of history behind it, and people have a confidence in their institutions and so forth. The European Union is only 50 years old, you know, so it's evolved, and it is complicated because it's not a United States of Europe. It's not a single entity. it's 28 different countries with different languages, different political cultures, different economies, different ways of looking at the world, working together in certain areas. And they take decisions in a complicated way, because if 28 separate countries are working together, it's bound to be complicated reaching decisions.
So, from an Irish point of view, from the Republic of Ireland's point of view, from your point of view, what have been the benefits, at least to Ireland and to the other member nations of the European Union? What have been the benefits of that?
I summarize it in 2 words: peace, prosperity. The European Union has presided over 70 years of peace in Western Europe, a continent that was devastated by war the previous 50 years, 2 world wars, massive losses of life and property and so on. And then prosperity. For the last 70 years, Europe has been a pretty prosperous part of the world. It's also promoted tolerance, and it's promoted friendship and cooperation between peoples. These are all very good things. Now, not everyone likes those things. Some people prefer a more robustly nationalistic approach to things, but the European Union has proved its worth in keeping Europeans together, preventing conflict, promoting cooperation, and making them feel a sense of comfort with each other, and also helping to enhance the prosperity of their countries. And for example, when Ireland joined the European Union in 1973, our wealth levels were 2/3 or less of the European average. Today, they're well above the European average, because we have taken advantage of access to a market of 500 million people. And American companies have come to invest in Ireland in order to have a base from which they can service that market of 500 million people. And that's the huge advantage to Ireland. It has transformed Ireland in so many ways. We used to be a nation of emigrants. Now we're a nation of immigrants. Do you know that 1 in 6 people today in Ireland were not born in Ireland?
No.
So we have a huge population of people from outside of Ireland who've come in over the last 20 years.
And that's one of the negatives of the European Union, in the opinions of a lot of people, because it has changed the complexion, so to speak, of these various nations, because you have completely open borders now.
Within the European Union.
Within
yes.
the European
Not
Union. So
externally.
People who are, if you're French, you can go to Germany without a passport. You can go to, Germans can go to England without a passport, etc. And work there, evidently.
Work and
so is that what's giving rise to a lot of this populism, a lot of this nationalism within some of these member states, that they want to keep Poland Polish and they want to keep Germany German?
I think one of the problems is that there's a confusion between migration within the European Union and immigration from outside the European Union.
Okay.
You will remember in 2015, when the Syrian conflict came to a head, large numbers of people started moving from the Middle East and North Africa into Europe, and it became a major crisis. And I think in the minds of many people, including the voters in Britain, that issue of people coming in from outside was confused with free movement within the European Union. We in Ireland don't have a problem. We have 17% of our population now born outside of Ireland, and we have no politician and no political movement that has sought to stir up trouble and argue for immigrants or people from other countries to be sent home.
I have 30 seconds in this segment. Can you explain it in 30 seconds why that is?
Well, I think it's partly because our economy has done very well. People understand that the Polish, Lithuanian, Latvian, Romanian, Bulgarians who've come in have actually made things better for Ireland, not worse. Now, I'm not saying that everyone is very happy with it, but I think overall people are happy.
Daniel Mulhall is with us. He's the ambassador to the United States from the Republic of Ireland, and we will continue in a moment on Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Tyndall Subaru Gastonia, featuring the new Outback with eyesight safety technology that sees problems and initiates action to help avoid trouble. Details at tyndallsubaru.com and on Facebook at Tyndall Subaru. And Caldwell UNC Healthcare, with 82,000 people in Caldwell County. Caldwell UNC Healthcare is driven by 82,000 reasons to grow and keep pushing forward. More at caldwellmemorial.org. 2018 proved proved to be a volatile year in stock markets around the world, and the constant gyrations have investors wondering what's next. Are we witnessing the switch from the longest bull market in history to a bear market? So far, 2019 is proving to be equally volatile, so we sit down with some market watchers and have them share their thoughts on what's going on and how you should be reacting tomorrow on this program at 9.
Los Angeles teachers are on strike. All sides agree they want smaller class sizes, more counselors, and better pay. But this huge school district and the union can't agree on how to fund it. Industrial action by educators was a big story last year, and some unions won big. I'm Joshua Johnson, The View from Southern California. Next time on 1A.
1A coming up from 10 to noon, right after Charlotte Talks, on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. Daniel Mulhall is our guest. He's the Irish ambassador from the Republic of Ireland to the United States. How long have you been the ambassador? Since the summer?
15 months, the summer of 2017.
What's going on in Europe with the European Union and with concerns over the changing of the culture in certain areas because of this cross-migration throughout the European Union and people coming in from the Middle East because of refugee situations? Do you see echoes of that, of concern, the kind of concern that has risen in Europe and in England about that? Within the United States, we have this desire on the part of many to build this border wall across our southern border. We have the tearing up of longstanding treaties like NAFTA. We have ourselves withdrawing from certain international cooperative agreements. Is that all part of the same thing, or is ours particular to just us?
No, I think there's a there's a global phenomenon at the moment which seems to be reacting against globalization, I suppose, is the best way of describing it, that people feel uncomfortable. We have been less affected by that in Ireland because I think the Irish people have always seen themselves as a global people because we have always been a nation of immigrants. Mm-hmm. And so now we're kind of quite comfortable with the idea of change and people coming in to our country. But no, I think, I don't believe that this phenomenon is restricted to the United States. I think that all over the place now in Europe, there are concerns about the world is changing rapidly, and a lot of people don't like the changes, and they think that somehow, pulling down the shutters is a way of dealing with those changes. We don't take that view. We think the best way that Ireland, the United States, the European Union can make our way in the world is by being out there and dealing with the world and trying to resolve the issues in a proactive way rather than retreating into our own shell, because certainly for a small country like Ireland, that kind of retreat is not an option. Yeah. I don't think it's an option either for the United States, to be honest with you, or for any other country for that matter. But obviously, if you're a bigger country, you have the feeling that you can fend for yourself and you don't need to cooperate with others. We certainly are strongly of the belief that we need to cooperate with other countries.
The President has talked many times about wanting to withdraw from NATO. He's pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. He is, in a tweet, decided to remove troops from Syria. We seem to be retreating from cooperation and leadership in the world. And we, from an American point of view, we keep being told by media sources and pundits and people in the know that America has to take the leadership position in the world, and if we don't, the vacuum will be filled and probably be filled by entities that we won't like very much. Do you see it that way? Does Europe see it that way?
I think that, first of all, Ireland is not a member of NATO, but we're a very close friend of the United States, and we appreciate the role that the United States has played over the last 70 years, the post-war period. I mean, we didn't join NATO for reasons I won't go into now, but we're a neutral country. But we play a big part in the UN. Our troops are active in UN peacekeeping operations all over the world. So we do play our part, but we do it in a different way. Nonetheless, we recognize that the transatlantic structures of NATO and just general cooperation and friendship between Americans and Europeans have been vital in directing the world in a way that has benefited us and benefited the world generally. And we don't want to see the clock turn back to, say, a pre-First World War situation where great powers vied with each other and didn't cooperate and so on. So we're firmly of the view that working together, that Europeans and Americans have the same interests. We may not think that way all the time, but ultimately we have the same interests and we have to work together to defend those interests. And that's why trade tensions between the US and the EU make no sense whatsoever. And these must not get out of hand, because if they do, it will damage both of our economies and both of our societies.
Is this America First stance being felt yet? Are you seeing tangible changes in either our relationships or in the result of what have been long-standing relationships changing?
Well, I obviously there are two things here. There's people say things in speeches and in other contexts, and then there are things that are done. I don't believe that anything has been done yet that represents a fundamental dismantling of the European-American alliance. And when I say alliance, I don't just mean NATO. I mean the general sort of recognition of Europeans and Americans that we have a lot in common and that we look to each other as the first supporters, first allies, and that we have shared interests and values that not everyone else in the world has themselves. So we have to defend those interests and values. So I think the transatlantic alliance, remains firmly intact. But obviously there are rumblings of discontent in various places, and as a small country, we actually have a stake in the current system, because it's allowed Ireland to advance as a country from being a very poor country 50 years ago to being now a fairly successful leading economy. And we want to try and continue to develop in the way we have over the last 40 years.
You met with President Trump at the White House when you took over your ambassadorial duties from your predecessor. You met and dealt with a lot of world leaders, because you've been the ambassador to a lot of important countries over the years. Take off, I know this is hard, it may be impossible, but take off your diplomatic hat for just a moment and give us your impressions of President Trump.
Well, a diplomat,
in that meeting that
diplomat never takes off.
Well, do it for me, because nobody's listening.
Their diplomatic hat. I'm sure there are people listening. If say anything that's unhatted, I'll be unseated.
What were your impressions of the president in that? What's he like behind closed doors?
I mean, first of all, I had a meeting with him for 10 minutes, right?
Okay, all right.
And
Did anybody take notes?
Well, it was myself and himself, and my wife was with me, and he was very kind to my wife, and I have a wonderful photograph of him beaming broadly, and he was very friendly, and everything I said to him, he responded to in a positive way. He obviously has an affection for Ireland. He has some business interest there. He has a golf club in the west of Ireland, which he's very proud of, rightly so, because it's a beautiful golf club indeed. So we had a very good, friendly conversation, But of course, we weren't engaging in a negotiation. We weren't trying to do a deal together. We were having a get to know you conversation, which I mentioned 3 or 4 things that were of interest to Ireland, and he responded in each case in a positive and friendly way. And then I met him again on St. Patrick's Day when our Taoiseach Prime Minister came over to meet him. And we had a number of meetings with him in the Oval Office, and then for a reception afterwards later in the day, and a lunch as well with the Speaker at the Capitol Hill. And again, there, we spoke and we discussed all sorts of things, and I had a perfectly normal conversation with him. You see, I don't know what it was like before the present administration, because I came in to office under the present administration. So I have a range of people I talk to in the State Department and in the National Security Council, the White House and so on, and the Treasury. And, I find that I can deal very comfortably with them. They listen to my points of view. But, I mean, obviously, this is a very different presidency from its predecessors, and I recognize that. But for me, as a foreign diplomat, it's not for me to make judgments about American politics. It's for me to find connections that I can develop that are positive and productive. And for example, there's an issue before the Congress today. Back in April, the US imposed sanctions on a number of Russian oligarchs, and we supported that because the European Union has sanctioned those same people over the years and done so repeatedly. But it so happened that one of those oligarchs owned a big alumina refinery in Ireland, and 1,700 jobs were at risk in the west of Ireland, directly and indirectly. And that would be, if the equivalent number of jobs in a country like America, that would be 120,000 jobs. So it's a massive sort of economic blow to us. And I lobbied the State Department and the Treasury. And eventually, in December of this year, they actually came out with a proposal that punished the oligarch while not harming and not destroying jobs and prosperity in the west of Ireland. Now, the Congress has to review that, and there are those in Congress who think this has been done to benefit Russian oligarchs, whereas I'm saying to them, no, this is being done in response to arguments that we made. And so, in this case, the administration listened to the views of Ireland and other European countries who have similar situations where they happen to be owned by Russian oligarchs. And today, the Senate is debating this, and I'm hoping that the Senate will decide to confirm the lifting of those sanctions or the adjustment of the sanctions in order to accommodate the concerns of a country like Ireland and our European neighbours.
Because the President, with some justification, has criticized American companies that put their headquarters operations in foreign countries to avoid taxes, and he's called Ireland a tax haven.
He has not, actually. Other people have, but first of all, Ireland is not a tax haven. That's a complete nonsense, and the President has never said that, in fairness to him. In fact, I'm told that part of the rationale behind the tax reform package that was done there last year was that they wanted to bring US corporate tax rates down closer to the levels that apply in Ireland. The fact is that there are 700 plus US firms in Ireland. The two main reasons they come to Ireland are, firstly, it's within the European Union. That's the key thing, because they want to access European markets. They can best do that from within the EU because there are no barriers at all between Ireland and the other European Union countries. And secondly, because they have access to a very well-educated English-speaking workforce. Those are the two main reasons. Tax is a third or fourth factor. So we have a package, and other countries could bring their taxes down to the same level as us. They wouldn't have the same success because they may not have the same other advantages like access to the European Union and also a very high-quality English-speaking workforce. And after Brexit, by the way, Ireland will become the only English-speaking country in the European Union. And we expect that more US companies will want to base themselves in Ireland in order to access the European market from Ireland.
That's why I believe you called Brexit a game changer for Ireland.
Yes.
Because it puts you in the catbird seat. You become the conduit, the bridge between the United States and the European Union because of your proximity to the United States geographically, and also because you'll be the only English-speaking country in the EU. Why aren't you and the rest of Ireland just chomping at the bit for the Parliament to say, let's get out, the British Parliament to say, let's get out?
No, we because overall, Brexit's a negative thing for Ireland. So we have to minimise the downsides, because remember that Britain is still a major trading partner for Ireland. So if our trade with Britain is disrupted because of Brexit, that's a negative for us. Now, there are compensations, and the biggest compensation is the fact that, for example, a Charlotte-based company, Bank of America, last year moved its European headquarters from London to Dublin because of Brexit. And there are other companies, other financial services companies in particular, who are planning to move parts of their operations to Ireland because Ireland will be within the Eurozone and within the European Union, and London will not be. So we benefit from that, from extra investment, but we lose out because of the loss of maybe trade with Britain, because trade with Britain becomes more complicated because Britain will no longer be within the European Union. And that's why for us, we're happy with the deal that's going through today. We hope that will succeed because that will avoid disrupting trade between Britain and Ireland, but it will still mean that there'll be advantages for Ireland in relation to being more attractive for U.S. investment in Ireland.
Why is trade with Britain so important to Ireland when you have access to the entire European Union and you'll be the fulcrum of the relationship between the U.S. and the EU?
Because of proximity. There's no doubt about it that trade, the main factor in trade is proximity.
Okay.
Two big U.S. trading partners are Canada and Mexico because of proximity. And the same is true with Britain. The key thing is that overall, only about 15% of our trade goes to Britain. So that's not overwhelmingly a problem. But if you look at certain sectors, for example, agriculture and food, a lot of Irish companies produce prepared foods for the British supermarket chains. And if that becomes more complicated, that's a serious problem for the Irish food industry. So it's not that across the board the effect may be minimal or maybe not too great, but in certain sectors, certain segments of our economy, it may be greater. And that's why we would prefer if Brexit weren't taking place. But if it has to take place, we hope it'll be a soft and a pragmatic Brexit that will keep Britain as closely aligned as possible to the European Union.
I don't want to get too bogged down in British or Irish politics because I don't think anybody listening will understand it. But
Good for them.
But Northern Ireland, which is part of Britain, part of the UK, Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party is keeping British Prime Minister Theresa May pretty much in power in the Parliament. Without their support, she'd be gone. And she's pushing Brexit, but from a very limited understanding of parliamentary machinations. The Democratic Unionists are joining with the Labour Party in Britain and others in opposition to her plan. They're supporting her on the one hand. They're opposing her on the other.
Yes.
Can you explain this to me?
Well, the first thing to say is that Northern Ireland endured 30 years of violence between the late 60s and the mid-90s. Since 1998, Northern Ireland's been at peace. There's been very little violence, and it's been a peaceful part of the world. The economy has developed greatly. It's really become a change place. And one of the advantages of the peace process in Northern Ireland and the single market within the European Union has been that there are no border controls whatsoever. So if you travel now from Dublin to Belfast, you will not know when you've crossed the border.
Right.
Except your phone may ping and it goes onto a Northern Ireland telephone network. But that's about it. So it's a totally open border, and people travel across for business, to visit family, to go to work. There are people from Northern Ireland working in our part of Ireland. There are people from our part of Ireland working in Northern Ireland, and so forth. And we want to avoid anything that creates barriers between North and South in Ireland. So the current arrangement, the current proposal, is that Northern Ireland should remain closely connected with the European Union, the single market, by having regulatory alignment and so on. And also that on a temporary basis, the whole of the UK should remain within a customs union so that there'll be no customs controls required. And that's unpopular with many of the more fervent supporters of Brexit. It's also unpopular with the Democratic Unionist Party because they believe that this somehow removes Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. In our view, it doesn't. This is just giving Northern Ireland the best of both worlds.
So they would like the Democratic Unionist Party that supports Prime Minister Theresa May but also does not like her plan. They would like the reinstitution of border controls and customs?
No, in fairness to them, they don't want that.
Okay.
In fairness, but they think that somehow a border can be avoided because it's not necessary to have these kind of arrangements, they would say, to avoid a border. They say, who's going to impose a border?
When we come back, your border with Northern Ireland is something like 410 miles. Ours is 2,000 across the southern U.S. When we come back, I want to talk about what the view of security within the EU is if you keep that border open once Brexit occurs. We'll be right back. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and St. Mary's School, an all-girls high school in Raleigh with boarding and day options, welcoming prospective families for day and overnight visits. Information at sms.edu. and the law firm of Horak Talley, with more than 185 years of combined experience in family law, whose goal is representing and protecting clients in separation and divorce. Details at horaktalley.com. Coming up in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock, a look at surviving R. Kelly and the Me Too movement through the lens of black women. Then, what the LA teacher strike means for the rest of the nation. That's 1A with Joshua Johnson from 10 until noon. Carol Channing passed away this morning, and we had the pleasure of hosting her in a special edition of Charlotte Talks back in May of 2006. If you'd like to go back and listen to that conversation, you can do it on the Charlotte Talks page at WFAE.org/Charlotte Talks. We're coming right back.
Sports, health, science fiction. What kind of podcast should WFAE produce next? Submit your idea to our Queen City PodQuest, the search for the next great podcast from the Charlotte area. You might just win a cash prize and a podcast development deal. Learn more and submit your idea by January 27th on WFAE.org/Queen City PodQuest.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins, and in advance of his appearance today at 1 o'clock at UNC on the main campus, UNC Charlotte on the main campus, Daniel Mulhall is our guest. He's the ambassador to the United States from the Republic of Ireland. So in the best of all possible worlds, you, Ireland, would like to see the border between the Republic of Ireland, which is the southern part of the island, and Northern Ireland to remain open the way it is now under the current arrangement with the EU, where it's just like those of us who live in North Carolina crossing into South Carolina. There's no border controls, no customs officials, no checking of passports. You'd like to see that remain if and when Britain actually makes the Brexit. How does the rest of the European Union feel about that? Because it seems to me, wouldn't that allow people to cross into, they come into Britain, and they would be able to cross into your country, which is part of the EU, unfettered, and they may not have papers to get into the rest of the European Union, but they'd be in, period.
Yeah. Well, in theory, of course, the border in Ireland will become an international border. In other words, a border between the European Union and a non-European Union member state. So in theory, therefore, the European Union should be saying to Ireland, there's got to be a border on the island of Ireland.
Right.
They haven't done that because our European partners recognise the special circumstances in Northern Ireland. That there was a 30-year...
But you're only as strong as your weakest link. Won't you become the weakest link in their protective security
I would say that
chain?
our European partners are willing to make an exception for Northern Ireland. They're willing to...
Is that smart?
I think it's smart because they understand that in the overall scheme of things, protecting peace in Northern Ireland, maintaining good links between North and South in Ireland, that's more important than any fears they might have about security. Anyway, the border in Ireland has never really been a border that people worried about because for people from outside the EU to get into Northern Ireland means they have to get into Britain first, and that's not going to be that easy given the attitude towards immigration in Britain now and then coming to Northern Ireland. So I think our partners have taken a pragmatic position that ideally they might say we need a border, but they've agreed to make special arrangements for Northern Ireland. And that's why really Northern Ireland should be very happy. In fact, most people in Northern Ireland are happy about this current deal because they realise it gives Northern Ireland the best of both worlds. They have total access to the European single market and also to the UK market. And they'll be the only place in Europe that will have that benefit. And that should be a big attraction for them in bringing in US investment into Northern Ireland, for example.
There are a lot of people, it strikes me, listening to this conversation that were not alive, or certainly were not old enough to understand what was going on between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland when the Troubles.
Well, it wasn't between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland. It was essentially an internal Northern Ireland dispute.
Okay, they don't remember that. They don't remember the violence. They don't remember
happily,
the bombings.
Happily, because it's been 20 years ago. So
they don't remember the bombings. It was essentially terrorism that was going on. And they don't remember that. And it was almost every week you would hear about a pub blowing up or people in a department store being killed or whatever. Young children being shot down in the streets, essentially. That all stopped
in 1994.
Because of the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes, correct.
Why do you think that a hardening of the border might bring that kind of violence back? Hasn't that been solved? Haven't the frictions that caused that in the first place been solved?
The violence has gone away, but the tensions are still there.
Still there.
It's still a fragile political situation. And the risk is that if you introduce a hard border onto the island of Ireland, this will add to the fragility of the political settlement, and that you could have a spiral back towards violence. Now, I wouldn't predict that, and I would never say that will happen, but there's certainly a risk of it. And because of the risk, we've been very vigilant, and we've been very strong in saying we cannot take that risk. We must protect the agreement at all costs. And the British government agrees with that, and our European partners agree with it. The problem is how to achieve it in practice. And as I said earlier, the DUP don't want a hard border on the island of Ireland. Nobody does, but there's no agreement on how exactly you achieve that outcome. There are different views about how that can be done.
You're a nation of, what, 4 million plus people? 4.7 million people?
5 million now, nearly. 4.9 million now. Yeah, our population's gone up dramatically in the last 20 years.
And 18% of those people are...
17% are born outside the States. Yeah.
Okay, so they're immigrants. I was reading about this yesterday. I believe that you talked to the president briefly about immigration. I don't know whether you talked about your immigration or our immigration situation, but evidently there are a number of undocumented Irish.
Correct.
Living in the United States. We never hear about these people. We only hear about undocumented people coming from our southern border.
Well, they're a tiny fraction. They wouldn't.
Okay, but nonetheless, how did they get in? Why are they undocumented? Why are they?
I suppose in the old days, in earlier times, people didn't emigrate to America. They were offered a job in a pub in New York or Boston, or they were offered a job on a building site by somebody that they had family connections with. They came over here. They never thought about the need to, get documentation, and, they worked happily away. And then, of course, things changed when, particularly after 9/11, obviously, American rules tightened up and so on, and rightly so, you can understand that. And a lot of Irish people found themselves stuck in a kind of a no man's land where they had never regularized their positions. They were working away here. Some of them may have businesses that they run. They have children who were born here. They're married, they're settled here. And just the atmosphere has changed in the United States, and there's no longer the same kind of tolerance for that kind of attitude.
So are you saying that they simply overstayed their visa? They were here on a tourist visa or a school visa?
Some of them came over short term and stayed or whatever. I mean, I don't know, because obviously these people don't reveal themselves to me. I may have met people who are undocumented, but I don't know, because they wouldn't tell me that they were.
Does our country seem to be at all concerned about those people?
Well, I think we have been talking to the administration about ways in which this issue could be resolved, but it would require some kind of general immigration reform to take place, and it was hoped that would happen last year, but it never did. So we work away on it, because we realise that it's important to try and rectify the situation, because these people are all, they're taxpayers, they're actually pillars of your society here. It just so happens that some of them don't have the documentation that they require. And because the atmosphere has changed over the immigration issue over the years, it's getting more and more difficult for those people to continue to be here.
Has it changed? I mean, we did a program with a family from South Africa who came here and did work for our military, work that only they could do. And they had trouble staying here once their visa, because they were trying to do it legally. Once their visa expired, they had trouble staying here. And they were doing work that was unique and that the Pentagon needed. And still, they had to jump through hoops. But we never hear about undocumented Irish. We never hear about them, and there must be undocumented French, undocumented Germans here.
Sure, there are. There are a small number of deportations every year. I think there were 30 last year. There were 20 the year before. So it's very small. The numbers are tiny, and there are also French people who are removed from the United States. There are people from all over the world. I see the figures. Our numbers are really very small. So it's not that anyone's going after the Irish trying to get rid of them. It's just that sometimes people are arrested or come into the hands of the legal system for other reasons, and then it's discovered they don't have documentation, and they are sent out of the country. But look, I mean, my view is that these people are an asset to the United States. It would be great if if their situation could be regularized here. Some of them will probably decide to go home in the end. Others will be regularized in other ways because some of them would have children now that will soon be 21, and those children then can get green cards for their parents. So I think the numbers involved will gradually go down. But we would like to see some legislation to deal with these issues and to allow these people to live normal lives here in this country.
The president's very concerned about trade and about trade deficits, and there's probably some justification for that. I'm told that today, at least the latest figures indicate that the investments of 700, there are 700 U.S. companies, I think, investing in Ireland, employing about 150,000 people, balanced by 500 Irish companies in the United States employing about 100,000 people. How might those investments be impacted by Brexit? Are they likely to change dramatically because you'll become the focal point?
They're likely to be boosted, I would say. We will see, and we're already seeing Bank of America moved in last year or increased their presence in Ireland, and now the headquarters for Europe in Ireland. Other companies likewise. We know that there's a lot in the pipeline. A lot of companies are waiting until Brexit happens and then they will make their move because they're not sure how things are going to work out between now and then. So I think we will see a boost in U.S. investment in Ireland. We will also see a boost in Irish investment in the United States, and here's why. Irish companies are doing very well at the moment. They're very profitable. They're generating profits, and they can invest those profits in expanding their business. Mm-hmm. They can't expand their business in Ireland because Ireland's too small, less than 5 million people. Traditionally, they would have expanded their businesses by moving into Britain. That would be less attractive from now on because Britain's no longer a member of the European Union from March of this year. That makes the United States a much more attractive proposition, especially as your economy is doing so well. And Irish people feel comfortable working here. You know, we understand the American business model because we have generations of contact with American business. So Irish companies, you know, I would like to see them investing in France and Germany and Italy, but the language barrier there is a serious issue for companies because, you know, they maybe think they can't quite figure out what the local situation is. Whereas in America, they can talk to their lawyers in their own language, they can read the laws, they understand the business culture and are very comfortable being here. For example, there are 20 Irish companies in the Charlotte area.
Right.
Alone.
And matter of fact, the biggest employer, I think, the largest employer in Davidson is Ingersoll Rand, which is
originally, well, it's not registered in Ireland, but there's a company called it's an Irish company, yeah. Now okay. It is, yeah. Right. I mean, companies obviously, international companies, you know, sort of move around and so forth. But actually, the biggest Irish employer in the United States is actually a company called Oldcastle, which is a building supplies company, and they employ 40,000 people all over the United States.
Wow.
Last year, they acquired a company for $3.5 billion, so they're huge investors. There are some Irish food companies that have acquired huge, you know, big US companies. So I believe that it will not be long before there'll be more Americans working for Irish companies than there are Irish people working for American companies in Ireland. I think that will happen, and that will happen in the next, I'd say, 10 years, because there's a growth in Irish companies moving in here. Mm-hmm. And I think this is going to mean that our relationship will be truly a two-way relationship. And that's the best relationship you can have. If it's one way, ultimately it goes sour. Right. Because one country feels it's being exploited. If it's a two-way relationship of trade, investment, and the movement of people, this is why I'd like to see more Irish people being able to come in here on special visa programs, and Americans being able to go to Ireland, because we have a lot in common. 1 in 10 Americans who visited Europe last year visited Ireland.
Wow.
Think about that. There are now 24 routes between the United States and Ireland. So more and more Americans are going to Ireland. They find Ireland comfortable because it's English-speaking. It's a European country, clearly, but it's English-speaking and it's familiar. Mm-hmm. And it offers people the European holiday without having to cope with cultural and linguistic difficulties.
And at least in this part of the world, there's a lot of relatives of people living here who are Native Americans, who are not Native American Indians, but Native people who have ancestors have lived here since the 1600s, who came from Ireland, first from what is now Northern Ireland, and later in the 1800s from the southern part of Ireland. So there's probably
10% of your population here have an Irish heritage.
There's an affinity.
There is, yeah. And I've seen that already. I mean, the music, for example, Irish music came over here in the 19th century. It merged with other musical forms and turned into bluegrass and country music, and then went back to Ireland, because there's a big following in Ireland now for country music and bluegrass. And so we exported our musical tradition. It merged with other traditions here in America, and then came back to Ireland.
Is this growth of Irish companies moving here also, is that what's causing your government to want to open up more missions, more diplomatic missions?
Yes, we're doubling. We're planning to double our global footprint over the next 10 years. We'll be opening 26 new missions. By 2025, we will have more than 100 missions around the world. When I joined the service in the early 80s, we had about 25. So we've gone from 25, we'll have more than 100. So we will have a genuine network of embassies and consulates all over the world. And the big game changer here has been, we opened a consulate in Atlanta about 10 years ago. And before that, our connections with North Carolina were almost nil. But in the last 10 years, our consul in Atlanta has started to prioritize North Carolina. And that's why we've had such a growth of links between Ireland and North Carolina over the last 10 years.
And don't we have a special consul in North Carolina?
Well, you have an honorary consul here as well,
consul?
John Young, who's done an excellent job. He's a businessman here, prominent businessman from Ireland, has a great love of Ireland, and he has been the mainstay of our community here. And yesterday I met a whole bunch of people from the Irish community, and they're very, very dynamic. They're proud of our culture. They're involved in all sorts of things, and they're planning to establish an American-Irish cultural centre here in Charlotte in the next 10 years.
We have 45 seconds left, and we have to talk about former Donegal senior football team manager Jim McGuinness, who's now the head coach of the Charlotte Independents of the United Soccer League. Yeah. His distinction is that he was a very successful coach there, and he's going to be one here. That's hope.
Right.
But it's two different kinds of football. He coached Gaelic football there, and he's coaching soccer here, which to us is not football. Yeah. So explain the difference in 15
Well, Gaelic football is 50-a-side game, and he was a legend of Gaelic football, to such an extent that Glasgow Celtic Football Club, who are a major football club in Scotland, play in European leagues, they brought him over to Scotland. He was successful there. He went to China to coach in China, and now he's here in Charlotte. I met him yesterday, a wonderful man, and I predict great things for Charlotte independence. And by the way, the coming years are the centenary of Irish independence, so it's great to have an Irishman running Charlotte independence. I know they will thrive. I look forward to coming here and watching them play in the next couple of years.
Daniel Mulhall is the ambassador to the United States from the Republic of Ireland. Thanks so much for the hour. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.